Hey, we're back again. This is the Coffee Talks here at HPE Discover. And now we're going to have a look at this new generation of compute experience brought to us by HPE. And we have Bob and we have Bret. And I'll just hand over to you guys to get started.
Well, thanks. Yeah, we're really excited about this. This is fabulous. We're introducing. I've been with HP Compact for many years. As you can tell, I'm looking quite worn out these days. But we're really excited about this. I think this is one of the more exciting announcements we've had probably in a decade. We probably not have anything this exciting in quite a long time. So, yeah, we're thrilled about it. And it, of course, we are basing the new innovations, or they're fitting into a triumvirate of three basic pillars of enablement, and that's agility, security, and economic control, of course. And so we have, by bringing these things together, and the nice thing is, of course, we're not going to go into any of the details of what's inside the processor or anything, because that announcement hasn't been made yet on what the speeds and feeds are of the processor. So we're just covering the HPE technology, and it's really quite amazing, I think, you'll find, with all of the great stuff that we've innovated on with our three pillars: agility, security, and economic control. With agility, we've got the new scalable persistent memory that Bret will talk to. That's exciting stuff. We also have intelligent system tuning that's part of that, and that's these things are new and exclusive to HPE. Only HPE has these, so it really helps differentiate us, and that's why I think it's so exciting. And then the security pillar is, of course, new revolutionary security technology that also is differentiated for HPE. And then finally, the economic control brings to light some of the new HPE Pointnext services that provide a great alternative to a public cloud environment, helping customers not get locked in. So if you don't mind, we'll take those one at a time and maybe talk about agility first. And Bret, you can cover that with persistent memory, and then I'll add into that intelligent system tuning that make up and round out that pillar.
Bob, thanks for that introduction. I'm Bret Gibbs. I'm the Persistent Memory Product Manager. And as Bob mentioned, in the agility pillar, we have many things going on. I'm the Persistent Memory Product Manager, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we just announced here at Discover in Vegas. We announced a new HPE Scalable Persistent Memory. Okay, what is scalable persistent memory? Let's kind of start with a little background on this product category. Persistent memory is the product category name describing products that run on the memory bus, but are used for storage use cases. So in Gen 9, we launched our first product in that category, the 8 gig NVDIMM. And the NVDIMM is essentially a DIMM backed by flash, runs on the memory bus, but is actually used for small storage bottlenecks, right? Things like, the transaction logs in database, caching tiers, things like that. So what's new in Gen 10 is, with this new scalable persistent memory, we're now taking it to the next level. What we have now is a terabyte scale persistent memory running at DRAM speeds. And what this is going to unlock is new levels, not only new levels of performance, but new use cases. Running in memory is nothing new. That's what applications have done forever. Running in memory with persistence, so your data in flight running in memory has a persistent layer, is what is new, right? And so the way we accomplish this, the NVDIMM is a new hardware product that we throw on the memory bus, right? So whenever you throw new technology on a memory bus, there's a lot of underlying things that have to change: the memory reference code, the BIOS optimization, and so forth. We said, hey, what if we took existing memory, HPE Smart Memory, and through BIOS means we tell that portion of memory, you're going to report back to me a scalable persistent memory, and we can do up to a terabyte, and it's flexible in how you configure it as well. DRAM is used for application acceleration. We use a tier of flash that's dedicated as a backup for that DRAM. So in the event that power comes down, whether it's through a surprise power loss or a graceful shutdown, that data moves from DRAM to your flash tier. And again, that flash tier is a dedicated flash tier. And you have to have a backup power source. So we have a new power supply that has a embedded battery backup capability. That facilitates the movement of data from DRAM to the flash tier. Okay, I've kind of told you what it is. What does it do for customers, right? That's really the important thing. Larger in-memory compute with persistence. That's one. Think about a Microsoft SQL Server Hekaton in-memory database. And the ability to run that data in flight, again, running in memory is not new, but running in memory with persistence is. And so typically what you do in any kind of application is anything running in memory occasionally does a checkpoint. Okay, a checkpoint is simply a save off to non-volatile media. That is an area of latency or a storage bottleneck that many customers that face. And we actually have some demos that kind of demonstrate how the impact of checkpointing using hard drives versus SSDs versus scalable persistent memory. I like to call it a bad EKG, because if you look at it, whenever we checkpoint to slower block storage, you tend to see drops in application performance. So every time that checkpoint happens, you'll see that drop in performance. SSD improves, definitely, because you're writing to a flash tier. But when you get all the way to the scalable persistent memory, what you see is more predictable performance. So instead of those drops during the checkpoint, you start seeing things smooth out. Also with Hekaton, we did an experiment where we took a 200 gig Hekaton in-memory database running about 500,000 transactions per second. So you got quite a few things going on there. We took it down, and with a layer of SAS SSDs, we did a restart, and essentially that pulls the data back from block storage and puts it onto a layer of SAS SSDs. We were back up and running in a very respectable 20 minutes. We repeated the test, we took it down, and then I put it into scalable persistent memory. The database restart time went from 20 minutes to 45 seconds. So the enabler here is you're using DRAM on the memory bus, low nanoseconds of latency relative to PCIe, which is measured typically in the microseconds of latency, and enables quite a few new use cases. So that in a nutshell is scalable persistent memory. We're also continuing our NVDIMMs. NVDIMMs are good for smaller storage bottlenecks, and the idea is, I like to say, they're right-sized capacity. So some of the use cases that we focus on are in the low gigabytes. The best problem solver for that is low capacity NVDIMM technology using DRAM backed by flash to get that memory-like performance, but get the persistence of storage. So that's it.
So Bret, if I'm buying this as I need a server that's got the scalable persistent memory, how does that look different as a purchase? Am I buying a particular SKU of server? Is it just that I need to buy a different SKU of power supply and then make sure I have that tier? What does it actually look like?
Right. Great question. Market enablement. This is something we spent quite a bit of time studying. It's one thing to make a nice product out there and throw it out in the market. It's another one to put a solution together. But if we do not make this easy for our customers to buy and for our channel partners to sell, we won't be successful. I don't care if it prints gold bars. It's not. We got to make it where it's easy to purchase. So initially, the way we have envisioned coming out in the market with this, we're going to make this available through our HPE factory configuration orders. We have SKUs that we call trigger SKUs. Essentially, when you purchase these, they provide the appropriate memory, the appropriate flash tier, and the battery backup source, as well as the infrastructure. But we also don't want to do an appliance where we lock you into a specific processor. So, for example, on the DL380, you'll be able to choose the other supported options. So we give you the flexibility of giving you everything you need with these trigger SKUs, while also preserving that capability to choose the other supported options on that platform. That's the initial phase. Phase two, we're looking at working through our channel partner community to help enable them in the market. I can provide them a menu on how to put this together. There's a lot of smart individuals out there, so what if we allowed them to be able to configure these directly for our customers? So we're looking at doing kind of a more build-your-own model down the road.
And then the other angle on this is we heard about the machine and the machine architecture yesterday. We discussed it a little more this morning. There's a lot of similarities in what you're achieving, but it's clearly going to be about different sets of applications, and this is something that we can buy in the next few months rather than in a few years' time. Can you sort of frame how the two ways of using persistent DRAM are different for customers?
Okay, excellent question. I think one of the key points we want to make is we outline a great vision of the machine and memory-driven computing, the architecture for the machine, and this kind of this vision of a shared pool of memory that can be used. What we're talking about, NVDIMMs are shipping today in Gen 9, and our next generation will be shipping with our Gen 10 product, as well as this new scalable persistent memory. The analogy I like to use is the Apollo program, the Apollo space program in the U.S., where Apollo 11 landed on the moon, right? In order to get Apollo 11 on the moon, you had to have missions 1 through 10. 1 through 10 didn't happen. We weren't landing 11 on the moon. With my 8 gig NVDIMM, that was the Apollo 1 mission. I have the Apollo 2 mission with my new 16 gig.
Please, the 8 gig DIMM is Apollo 2. Apollo 1, they all died.
Well, yeah, that's, yeah, well, that's, perhaps not that, but we're going to give them homage. Those were brave souls, right? You gotta step out there and be the first. But that analogy, really what I'm going with is the fact that this is what we're shipping and is available today to customers. And to get to that real vision of memory-driven computing utopia, it's going to take steps along that journey to get there. And so with this persistent memory, it's fulfilling the long-term vision of memory-driven computing. So that's the tie-in. Real product today to help fulfill the vision of memory-driven computing in the future.
So on more of a practical side for that scalable non-volatile memory, are the form factors not changing from what we have today in the 8 and the 16 gig when we scale up to the 1 terabyte per? And how does the changes to the architecture of it affect the thermal and other operational characteristics of a server that's loaded chock full of this stuff?
Okay, great question. So the NVDIMMs are both hardware and software ecosystem. But it's unique hardware, right? I'm actually putting something new on the memory bus, a DIMM backed by flash, which differs from the traditional RDIMM that you use for server memory. With scalable persistent memory, I'm actually leveraging the memory that is actually on the memory bus, the HPE smart memory. I'm leveraging flash that's used in the data center today. Now, the power supply that I'm talking about is in a flex slot form factor. What's new, what's unique is having lithium ion contained within that flex slot power supply. We've made a design in the DL380, an air baffle that helps bring the keep the ambient temperature lower for that power supply, because as you know, you want to keep ambient temperature exposure down whenever you're using lithium ion. Thermals are not an issue because we're leveraging the existing memory, we're leveraging flash, and so that's the cool thing about this. We're not going to ask our customers to go put necessarily new widgets in the box with a scalable persistent memory. Why not use the DRAM and the flash and the backup power that you've traditionally used in your server for this new solution? So
does that mean that the flash is going to be put in the front end just like any of the other SSDs, but dedicated in the setup of the server? So you go into the boot configuration piece and say, this is the SSD that I'm going to dedicate over to the scalable, or how operationally do we look at this?
Operationally, so we're actually using 2.5-inch NVMe drives in our initial implementation. The cool thing about this design is that I can, as I move into different phases, I can look at using different things. But our initial release, we wanted to have the highest bandwidth flash available in the server, and that's the NVMe drives. So those 2.5-inch NVMe drives will go in the normal drive bays that you see in the ProLiant server. They will be dedicated. They actually will not present back to the operating system as available storage. We dedicate it specifically to scalable persistent memory. All the configuration rules, how much persistent memory you allocate is controlled. There are some BIOS settings, and we use the ILO REST interface, so customers can go in there, and if they need to change the persistent memory regional size, they're able to do so. Kind of hence the scalable name, which allows you to, if you want to back some of that off and allocate some of that memory back to server memory, you can do that. If you want to increase it and you want to increase the memory size, you add additional memory, and you should be able to go in there into the settings and change the persistent memory region size.
So is that going to be an obviously labeled slot in the front panel for where you're putting the 2.5-inch in, or when we talk about dedicating, is that because the tracings are different not just because it's NVMe, but because of the way that it's going to have to be able to have fast route to destage all those pieces? Or is it?
Yeah, great question. How are customers going to know? So our initial market implementation of this, we're going to do HPE factory configuration. So the only way you'll be able to purchase this is through the factory configuration where you purchase these SKUs. And in the factory, we not only include the appropriate memory, flash, and backup power and related infrastructure, we actually do the installation for you. We have a factory script that runs that performs the appropriate BIOS settings for setting the scalable persistent memory region. The vision here is that when it leaves the HPE factory and final config is done, that it lands in the data center and is ready to be run as a scalable persistent memory region for the storage workloads.
Last question. Is there any option for doing PCIe for the NVMe instead of using up valuable drive slots?
Initially, no, but one of the things I want to kind of signal to you guys today is, our initial release is going to be somewhat fixed as far as the flash tier, but we are looking at ways to do things differently. So maybe perhaps looking at flash inside the server instead of a drive bay, number one. Also looking at more cost-effective ways to bring what I call the cost of persistence down. Cost of persistence, of course, is your flash tier and your backup power. So phase two, one of the areas that we're investigating is potentially looking at going outside the box and tapping into UPS power inside the rack, right? Many enterprise customers already have this problem solved, right? It's not a unique problem that we're trying to solve in persistent memory land. The problem of unplanned downtime due to power loss, enterprises have already mitigated against that. So we're looking at kind of unique ways to solve this problem, bring the price point down, and also increase the flexibility of how you configure this.
Just a small tip, relying on the UPS doesn't help the human factor, because the number of times that I pulled the wrong cable, or worse yet, somebody else has, here's the right cable, you pull it, and it turns out that was the wrong one, even though you thought you traced it. You definitely want those batteries inside the chassis.
Yeah, so great point, and that's we realize that as a product manager, when I'm looking at this, I realize that complete solution in the box will be a product that will continue. We're looking at other ways to get this on additional platforms and more market reach. But you're right, we have the human factor. We always have to build in that design, right? Thank you.
And Brett, one more from me, again around the operational piece. The destaging from RAM out to the flash and the restaging on boot is all in BIOS. Does that mean this is a different BIOS to the standard BIOS for the model of server that we implement this on?
Great question. This is not unique BIOS, except that it's unique to HPE, right? That's one of the other things that when we were looking at market enablement, we looked at the traditional ways of how do we license this? And we decided that that's not what the path we wanted to take, right? We want to make this as easy as possible for our customers to enable. So again, the idea is for initial enablement, let's go do these factory config SKUs, let's drop it in the data center ready to run. But again, I think pretty quickly we're going to look and see how can we allow customers to kind of build their own solution. We just want to make sure that we have all the required components out there so it's ready to run day one.
Okay, so let me continue now. Now we've covered the first part of the agility pillar, right? So we have agility, security, economic control, and I'm going to add to that a little bit to the agility pillar, and that's with a new technology that's very new, unique, differentiated for HPE, and that's intelligent system tuning that we've announced this week. So intelligent system tuning, it has three components, and I'll go through each of those three briefly, and then you can ask questions about that. The first one is jitter smoothing, is what we're calling it, and that is particularly important for the FSI vertical market segment. Heretofore, those FSI, especially if you're doing high-frequency trading, you've typically not been able to invoke the turbo mode because it creates a little bit of jitter, or that sinusoidal wave function that you get when you jump up. And so every time then you turn from going down in frequency to back up, the processor is actually looking where it's going to land next, and it's not doing trading at that time. So what we do is we're actually working a little bit with Intel, and we're getting the information that we need from the processor to then dampen that out, so we can actually deliver deterministic frequency at higher than baseline. So the FSIs, the high frequency traders, can invoke or go up into turbo mode and have completely flat deterministic frequency, which is really remarkably important for them, just incredibly important. Before this, they would just buy the highest processor that they could with the most performance and then not go into turbo mode. Now we can do that for them and provide that higher level. And the benchmark, the internal lab results that we've got indicates is about 12% higher than what the baseline frequency would be, up to 12%. So it's pretty significant. We add to that, that's jitter smoothing. And really great for the FSI as well as a couple of other markets like video streaming. The second thing we've done, and this has really been in collaboration with Intel, is our core boosting technology. What we've done is worked with Intel on a few private SKUs, an 8, 16, 24 core, a private offering that's not on their roadmap, that's just unique and privately offered to HPE, and then we'll offer these in our Gen 10 servers. We are actually able to boost up or increase the thermal design point while keeping the cooling, thanks to our IP cooling stuff that we've got inside the server, the technology that we've got inside the server. We can actually increase the performance and, most importantly, keep more cores on active as we go up into the turbo mode. So when you normally, with the Intel turbo mode, you would be shedding cores in almost a linear fashion, we can now keep up to 33% more on and in the active mode as we boost up into frequency. So this is important. Why? Well, it provides more cores at a higher frequency. Naturally, that's certainly a plus, but it also conversely offers fewer cores at the same frequency. So if you're concerned with the licensing, application licensing expense, we can reduce the core count that those customers have at a set frequency. So that's fairly significant. And then we can go the other direction. We can come down for non-peak period when we don't have a lot of load or demand on the workload. We can come down and save that energy for obviously cost savings and energy efficiency. So that's the second one, that's core boosting. And then the third component of this great new and only HPE technology is our workload matching. So normally, of course, in the BIOS, you have a number of different settings that you can adjust and tweak and spend a lot of time getting exactly accurate. What we've done is created 15 predetermined workload settings that you invoke through ILO, and then those will be pre-optimized for a workload that you may choose to run. So let's say you're running a virtualized workload. You simply click on that virtualized workload in ILO, and then that tunes all those knobs to be the most optimum configuration of the server to meet the needs of that workload. So those are the three things, and of course we have some telemetry that monitors all of that along the way. That's intelligent system tuning. Any questions on that?
In your 15 choices, you mentioned virtualization as an example. Those of us that work in virtualization day in and day out know that you could use all 15 with various virtualization workloads. Is there going to be a custom to let us override everything and tune it ourselves for the places where we know we need to?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because at HPE, we're all about customer choice, as you've heard our senior leadership talk about. So naturally, you can still do that. What we're trying to do is, and we actually have a couple of virtualized workload environments as part of that 15. So we know that's a big demand. So several of those are just for virtualized environments or virtualized workloads. But should the customer still want to go back and make all those fine-tune adjustments, they certainly are free to be able to do that. We just want to save time, money, energy, and effort if we can.
Follow on to that, hypervisors have sometimes been challenged. Sometimes, I think they're currently all challenged by some of the dynamic loading, unloading in the servers. Kind of the best practice has always been set it for maximum performance and walk away. In this new environment, are we also going to have some custom drivers that will actually bring some intelligence into those hypervisors that are really stupid about power tapping and some of those pieces that cause us today to just full performance and walk away?
Well, we like to be able to do as much of that as we can. I'm not sure that we can solve every single problem in that particular case. Or you might call it, it sounds like you're trying to make it idiot-proof or something like that. I wouldn't go that far, nor would I call our customers idiots for sure. But we're trying to make sure that we're maximizing the ability to performance tune.
To be clear, I'm talking about the hypervisors being idiots,
Very good.
not the users of the hypervisors.
Thank you very much. That's a good distinction. Yes?
So what's the process for adding to those 15 predetermined workloads? Do you have a lab? How do you do testing? How do you select the applications?
So what we've done is predetermine them based on talking a lot of conversations with customers on what we think are the most utilized workloads, I think is what you're asking. How did we pick those, and can we add more? Well, the answer is right now they're predetermined at those 15 states. We probably will look at adding more in the future. Going out the door with the shipment of Gen 10, it'll be those 15 that are pre-selected. Let me shift and talk about security then a little bit if I could. That's the second pillar. So we did agility, now we'll talk about security, which is a really brand new thing for the introduction to the industry of the world's most secure industry standard servers, and we're really proud about that. We started with our great engineering and our technologists several years ago, looking at what the attack surfaces were and where we needed to go with security, and have met that demand, that need, because as we've seen now, those attacks are going up exponentially. And so we have introduced or branded the HPE Secure Compute Lifecycle that really is this holistic approach to security all the way from cradle to grave at the very inception of a product, all the way through the production, manufacturing, supply chain for the product into the customer's location, and then finally to the natural end of life of that solution. And it's based on our HPE differentiated new technology, the Silicon Root of Trust. So let me just talk about that briefly, because that is really the key of what one of the keys of what we're doing here. We're actually anchoring into the silicon, and we're in a unique position at HPE because we design, develop our own custom HPE ILO 5 silicon chip. And by doing that, we're able to open the gates, burn the gates, and embed the cryptographic algorithms that are necessary so that we can tie to that or anchor into that all the rest of our Server Essential firmware. ILO, UEFI, CPLD, IEME, and all that's tied in and has that firm foundation. So unlike our competitors that try to anchor some of the firmware, we're actually anchoring down into the silicon itself. Our competitors generally buy off-the-shelf ASICs, and so they don't have that capability. We do, and we've leveraged that, and we've come up with Silicon Root of Trust that provides this ultimate protection throughout the supply chain into the customer. And then when it's at the customer's site and it's up and operational, then we do monitoring or detection of any malware or compromised code that might be inserted at any time, because we're checking that firmware on a regular basis. And then if there's anything that's detected as an anomaly or some type of security issue, then we can actually recover. So that's a really strong story between the protection, then the detection, and this ability to recover. Those three things are unique for us that we're offering. We also are incorporating the new commercial national security algorithms, the CNSA suite, that is a set of the strongest security ciphers available in the world today. That is one of the operational modes for our Gen 10 servers. So unlike our competitors that may have 2, maybe 3 modes of operation, we actually have 4. The production mode that it ships in, and then high security mode, FIPS mode, and then finally CNSA mode at the very top, CNSA suite mode. So that's really differentiated. And then, of course, we're working and applying the NIST 853 controls to a solution set of the HPE equipment. And I think that's really important. We've seen a number of things happen here recently. Well, there was a federal executive order that came out, I think it was May 11th, required all federal agencies to apply the NIST standards or controls to the cybersecurity prevention practices, right? So here we are at HPE, just in time to delivering some of these security controls on our solution set. That shows, I think, real innovation and forward thinking on the behalf of HPE. So all this goes together to provide a really good, solid security story. It's a life cycle. It's from cradle to grave, and we have, a comprehensive DCIG, even EG or HPE look, because we've got point next services that provides security and protection services, as well as supply chain that has anti-counterfeiting, anti-interdiction, and a bunch of things that they're doing there that are unique and differentiated. We also have, with our Aruba networking, we have Naira now that applies some machine learning inside the network, so we can proactively determine if there's any type of behavior that looks like it's a bad actor inside, and then block that user out temporarily before any damage is done. So we're using that to take security to the next level through machine learning. And of course, with our 3-part, we've got great security protection there. So we're tying all this together to a really very firm, comprehensive security approach.
So where do you have your ILO chips fabbed? Because physical security during the manufacturing process is absolutely paramount to creating that root of trust, right?
You are absolutely right. In fact, I've talked to some customers that say, you know what I'd like, Bob, is I'd like a security guard to go with your solution all the way through. And that's kind of what we've done, in effect, with the Silicon Root of Trust. And we produce we have a USA-made BIOS, which I think is pretty key. And the ILO chipset itself is made in a TAA country. So we're very confident that as we put that together in a TAA-approved country, it's very secure. It's HPE silicon that has that anchor inside of it, and then from there on, it cannot be breached. And if it is breached, if it were to be breached, then we would be able to detect it. Okay, let me just finally cover, because we talked about agility, we talked about security, and economic control is the last one. Of course, we have some stuff that we're offering there, and I think some of the HPE PointNext services are really great, and they help provide that same approach that you get in with public cloud, but on an on-prem environment. So we have capacity care, where HPE PointNext services will sell you the amount of compute power cycles that you need, and then or scale back if you don't need that. So they'll come out, deliver that. That's a great solution for the customer, also for some of our value resellers, because they can be the ones to go out and deliver those new hardware solutions to the customer. It's great for customer retention for the resellers as well. That provides that public cloud experience of just paying for what you need without getting locked into the public cloud. Because as we all know, once you get up into some of these large, big public clouds, it's very difficult to extract yourself from there. So you can run that. We also have a partnership now with Mesosphere that provides you some of the same flexibility you would get in a public cloud, but you can do it on HPE approved hardware in your own on-prem private cloud type environment. And then I'll turn it over to Milan. This is Milan Sheti. He's our CTO for DCIG, and he might have a few things he wants to add. I'm not sure.
You covered it very well. I'm just going to help with any questions which you haven't covered between you and Brent. You guys did a good job of covering the entire announcement. So yeah, that was really well done.
So back to the Silicon Root of Trust. If I equate what I heard to what we have today in the modern PKI, where we've got private public key, certificate authorities, things like that, I'm going to work under the assumption that HPE becomes my root CA, and I've got the equivalent of a certificate baked into that ILO. When I say baked in, is that something that expires, so we have to worry about certificate replacement, the equivalent of? And if not, if there is a compromise of that chain, how do we update, replace, remediate without pulling the entire ILO chip, which is on the board?
Right. Okay, so let me take the second part, because that's really the fabulous thing that HPE is doing here. And the answer is, we're doing a secure recovery automatically with the new ILO Advanced Premium Security Edition license that we are announcing and will be selling with Gen 10. We actually have, as part of that, the secure recovery. Therefore, we're keeping a safe, authenticated, good copy at another location inside the server. It's not the A or B side to the firmware like you are typically familiar with. This is in a nondescript location where it can't be breached, and we can recover. We check that on a regular basis to make sure it's authentic and malware free, and then we recover to that. So if there is a breach that's detected, somebody gets in somehow to physical access and puts some leads down on a spy part or something and puts some compromised code in there, it will be detected because we're monitoring. We have the firmware runtime monitoring as part of the license that we're selling, the security edition. We will catch it. We'll send an audit log out. That audit log can be read by the customer just because it's a simple ILO audit log. Also can be registered as part of an ASIM tool, like if you're running ArcSight on top of that. So that can catch it as well and alert the customer to that. And then the customer has three choices. One, don't recover because I want to take that server offline and do some forensics on it, because sometimes they want to do that and see where the hacker came from. Two, recover to the last known good state, and they go over inside the server and they fetch that ILO, that entire UFI ILO firmware. or 3, they go all the way to back to the factory settings if they want to, just to be extra safe. So it happens securely and automatically. I do want to make a point about firmware upgrades, because I do get that question a lot. Because those upgrades will come from HPE, they'll be signed, authenticated, and so it'll naturally match the encryption that we've got, or the algorithm that's in the, so there's no delay to, or no problem with making updates to the firmware. I think that's probably important that we mention as well. And then you want to know, does it change, or do you have to? It won't. So as long as you have that server, that Gen 10 server with the ILO 5 silicon chipset, it remains the same. It's embedded in and anchored to that silicon. It'll be the same for the life cycle. There's no need to replace or pull out the silicon chipset there. And I think that, does that answer your question?
Not exactly.
Okay.
The answer that you gave was to compromise of the ILO code itself. What I was driving more towards was the signaturing itself. So think in software terms, just traditional software running, we have the signature for the code itself.
Right.
But we also have the signing portion needs to be maintained. That chain of trust needs to be valid and good and trusted all the way back. We have had instances in recent memory where some of the authentic code signing from Microsoft has been stolen, duplicated, and we had what looked like good, clean code that had malware in it.
Right.
And therefore, that's
See,
really where I'm driving towards.
Yeah, and that's perfect, because what we do now is we have this second layer of protection, because let's say you get the signed firmware update from HPE that's validated as authentic and it's all been signed by us, but you're saying it gets interdicted or something and there's some malware put it?
Not so much that, but somehow somebody is either brute forced the key.
Their way in there to a key. Yeah, well then as we update it, it wouldn't match the silicon, the algorithm in the silicon, so it wouldn't run that bad code.
And one of the things we haven't quite publicized is that we actually do have multiple keys and multiple hashes there as well. So it is possible to have multiple different roots if the core root was compromised for some reason or for any reason. It can pick up different root. So it kind of works very similarly. Very simplistically put, it will work very similarly to like a blockchain concept, but you can have the source. You don't rely on just one root. You actually can have multiple roots, but not multiple roots at the same time. The second root is only activated if the first root is definitely compromised, or the hash has been figured out somehow. So you can go to, and the firmware has the mechanism to figure out, and that's what Bob mentioned about the detect, protect, and recover. That's part of that stages. You can actually do have, if the hash is compromised, to get to a different hash.
So there's going to be some sort of online repository that.
That's right, and we know what the hashes are, and we know what the roots are, and everything. But that is an, I would call, the nuclear option. Right, because most likely what's going to happen is that the customers would, our belief is, and again, this is new, the entire industry will have to adopt it and everything, or the customer base has to adopt it, right, is the 3 scenarios Bob mentioned, right? Go back to the factory setting, or go back to the last known good state, or just pull the drive. Our belief is, and again, the serviceability and the use, how people use it is going to be very interesting here, is that our belief is that when something that dramatic happened from a nuclear standpoint, customers would probably want to go the forensic first before they will take an option of going to the second route. Because with virtualizations and stuff, you can move the workload and try to figure out what happened so it doesn't happen again. And so going to the alternate route of chain is probably going to be, we believe in a life cycle of a product, we may have to activate it like 1 or 2 or 0 times. But that capability does exist.
Is there going to be the need in the algorithm, as you guys perceive it, for online revocation lists that the ILO is going to have to reach out and update itself, just not from a firmware standpoint, but to get?
Yeah, so the revocation, so the base certificate is probably not going to be revoked unless the nuclear option has to be triggered. But the chains, we do anticipate revocation is going to be as a possibility, and that is already baked in. But the root is not going to be revoked without that nuclear option. But in any scenario, you don't have to take the ILO out or the motherboard out to go through the entire life cycle of all the different incidents which could happen.
So when we think of the chain, are the individual fabs going to end up being intermediate issuers essentially?
That's right. That's right. And that's how we would know, right? Because there are lots of parts and lots of options which will come in, right? NVMe drive, as was discussed earlier, or flash and everything. Where we want to take this ability is that today it's only on the server and what is attached on the motherboard and the firmware attached to the motherboard. But you also want to take it to the option side of things which are plugged in. And that's kind of the security roadmap. But it could be a NIC driver or NIC card which is getting plugged in, because that could be in surface area down the line, right? So those things we're also going to take a look at. Not only that, where we want to take this is then also go ahead and everything which is connected to the server. There could be the external storage, external switches, external. So we extend that chain not only to what's on the board and the firmware on the board, but also the options on the server, and also externally attached components through either fiber channel switches or Ethernet switches. So that's our goal, and that's how you just start reducing the attack surface, and that's the plan.
So when you talk about how it's going to be able to analyze behaviors and watch for suspect behavior and flag it and let you do some number of choices, is that something that's going to be tied to firmware rev, or is there going to be more dynamic updating so that you can quickly get new behaviors released based on zero-day exploits that are discovered, et cetera?
Yeah. So now we're talking a little bit of the future. So some of this is not definite in the roadmaps. I'll give you the theory of operation on how we are thinking about this. So we believe the way this is going to do there is going to be some machine learning which will go in ILO at some point. Because ILO's got the CPU complex and also the memory complex on ILO is sufficient enough to do some rudimentary machine learning to detect some of the outliers and the stuff which is happening. So that is something which we are thinking through on how to implement that. And much like the antivirus and the antivirus description files get updated periodically, we do believe when we get more components attached to this secure root of trust, we will have ability to just change the definition files on a periodic basis. So very analogous to the antivirus industry on your PCs. But that is something which we have a lot of work to do to get that.
It's pretty obvious where the question came from, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's going to mirror. I think the use case is going to mirror very much like the definition files and everything to update only the pieces without having to update the entire firmware. There is another dimension to it which we are thinking through is the online upgrade pieces, because you don't want to take your server down to do any of these upgrades and everything. So that's another dimension from a resiliency standpoint, which we are thinking through from a roadmap standpoint on how to introduce it very safely and very securely.
I'm curious from the economic control perspective, just trying to get an idea. I know there's probably a wide variety of options, but if I'm seeking to shift some of my computing from existing fixed capex to more of an opex model, how should I be thinking about that from a budget perspective? Am I kind of thinking about this as perhaps a 3 to 5 year lifespan of that pricing up cycle, or is this going to be available on a month-to-month basis, yearly basis? Kind of, can you shape out a little bit of the flexibility that's available from that opex perspective?
Yeah, I think we've run a couple of models, and in fact, if you go out to booth 401, they actually have a little alert monitor that shows you when you need to add additional capacity and what that savings is like. I think a lot of it depends on if the capex is important to you or opex. Certainly, some firms are more sensitive one way or prefer to go one way or the other. But we have created some models and run some models that show what the ROI is, and of course, there are some break-even points depending on how long a period of time you're looking at.
I think the flex capacity model, I think from a use case standpoint, because we have such a very large install base from small and medium businesses to large enterprises, the infrastructure, both on the flex capacity on the compute side as well as on the storage side, the flex capacity itself is flexible. in that when customer sees the experience, they can plan for it on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, or yearly basis. The granularity is on the monthly basis and the monthly invoicing model, from the least granular and from the maximum granular it can be an yearly basis. Very few people, I think, would take the option of a 3 or a 5 year, because folks who are generally shifting from a capex to an opex model are thinking generally from a customer use case standpoint for a sub 3 year kind of model, because that's because if it's a 3 year model, then it's kind of like capex anyways.
Right, but just considering, say, purchasing a core on a month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter, year-to-year basis versus purchasing the equivalent to computing on a permanent basis, is there kind of an idea of how much that would cost in comparison? Do you have kind of benchmarks, kind of rule of thumbs in place? Yeah, so to Bob's point, I think there are a bunch of modelings which are there in the booth, because it all depends on the configurations too, right? It's the and that when the ROI and when the tip over happens between one model to the other model is definitely something which has been and there's a lot of work which the team has done around modeling that.
Yeah, in fact, do they let you guys out here? Can you get out to the floor sometime? It'd be good to come by, because we do have a couple of scenarios model, and they show you what the different break-even points are. Okay, we appreciate your time. Is that?
Thanks, guys. That's been really useful.